7 years old, I was at church, and I've been asking a lot of questions about what it meant to be saved, and as kids say sometimes, baptized. They couldn't say it right. I kept asking questions. I want to go down. I want to be saved. I want to join a church. I want to be baptized. And my parents kept putting me off. They kept saying, well, you're just not ready. You're not ready. And I had a lot of friends being baptized, kids that age, and I wanted to do that. And I genuinely believe I felt the Lord stirred in my heart, man. We had a hellfire preacher preaching revival one day, and I still remember images in my mind and everything. Well, I caught my mama work in the choir. My daddy was in the nursery or something, working. And so I went with my parents. Well, they gave the invitation and they weren't there to tell me no. So I walked out, I went down, and of course, I had a lot of people asking me questions and trying to reassure that I really knew what I was doing. And I made that decision, was baptized, and I was 7 years old. I don't remember what grade of school that was, but I remember being at Vacation Bible School somewhere around the 4th grade and sitting in that little classroom in that little wooden chair in that semicircle. And I just remember them talking about sin and being saved, and my heart did that somersault, and conviction hit me for the first time. And I wrestled with that. It was funny at the time in our church. We had this man that mentally, he was a little bit unstable, and he would go to the front every Sunday wanting to make a decision, wanted to say something. And, you had to, after being a pastor, I realized how you kind of have to manage that. You can't just let somebody loose in front of your people all the time. And I knew something was different about him. Nobody really made fun of him or said anything, but as I felt convicted about being lost and wondering if I'd really made the decision, I felt the devil even then whispering in my ear saying, you don't want to look like that guy. You don't want to look goofy going down there in front of the church. You've already done that. You've already done all this, And so I remember one night, it was March of 1991. We had revival, a spring revival in the church. The last night, Wednesday night, the preacher for the revival gave the appeal for the invitation, and I just remember being under heavy conviction about needing to be saved, but I was scared to death to walk down in front of people. I was ashamed of myself. I didn't, it was spiritual warfare. The enemy was attacking, trying to give me every reason not to go. And I just remember kind of dealing with God. I don't know who we are, but even in my 12-year-old mind, I was bargaining with the Lord and just saying, Lord, I just remember thinking to myself, Lord, if you'll tell him to, for me to talk to somebody after church, I'll do it, Lord. And about that time, the preacher said, if something's keeping you from coming, just don't leave tonight before you find somebody. And when he said that, I knew he was talking to me. I knew I needed to be the Lord. I don't know if y'all remember or not, but that was around the time when I lived over in Arkansas, but I think y'all probably heard about it in this area too. This guy was predicting this huge earthquake. It was supposed to turn the world upside down kind of thing. And I remember laying there in bed at night thinking every night, boy, if that earthquake hit, am I going to die? Am I going to go to heaven, And I'd say, Lord, if I ain't saved, save me. If I ain't saved, save me every night, And so it was a matter of looking back. It was a matter that I needed to get that in order. I needed to know. And it could have been happening when I was 7, but it really wasn't made real until I was 12 then to come to know Christ. But I remember that night I avoided my mom, and we were some of the last people getting ready to leave church. And she said, come on, Jay, we got to go home. You got school tomorrow. And I started crying. Oh, I can't go home, Mama. She said, come on, we'll go talk about it. No, I want Brother Doug. And all I can remember was the preacher saying, don't you leave this church till you get it right. And I couldn't leave. And I went and found Brother Doug, and we talked for a minute, and he talked about, not worrying about what I did in the past, but let's make sure right now. And I prayed. I knew what to say. I knew what to do. It was just a matter of confessing and admitting it and processing that and giving that to the Lord. And that night in March of 1991 is when the Lord Jesus saved me. after I came to Christ, just thinking back over my life, sometimes we think we come to the Lord or we get things right with the Lord that everything ought to be better. But my experience was it got a lot harder. And even as a kid, in that same period where Christ was drawing me to Himself, things were unraveling in my parents' life. And when I was in the 4th grade, I was 10 years old, and my mother had found out she was expecting my baby brother, and medically speaking, she wasn't supposed to be. When she went to the doctor asked her about her condition, and she said, what do you mean, what condition? What are you talking about? And the doctor asked her, she said, you've never been diagnosed with anything? And she said, no. And she said, well, I'll be back in just a minute. She came back. She had called and got some appointments and some stuff lined up for her to go see some other specialists. And she came back and she told my mother, she said, I will not see you again until you go to these doctors. Well, 2 weeks later, my mother was diagnosed with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And at the same time, she was told, if you decide to carry this baby, which you need to give serious consideration to terminate this pregnancy. Because what's going to happen is everything the baby needs he's going to get, but he's going to take it from you, and you're not going to get that back. I look back and I remember my mom, and as much as a 10-year-old can know at that time, I knew something was going on. Mom had been to some doctor's visits, and I remember seeing her for a few days. It's all I remember standing up in my mind. She was sitting in her bedroom in the rocking chair and crying a lot and holding her Bible. And I didn't know what was going on, but she had some decisions to make. And as an adult now, I look back, and some of you may have heard of the Bible study Experiencing God by Henry Blackaby. And one of the 7 things he calls the realities of experiencing God is that every believer goes through a crisis of belief moment. Well, I think that was the crisis of belief moment for my mom. Was she had to choose, am I going to do what the doctor's telling me, or am I going to do what the Lord's telling me? And praise the Lord, she chose life. She chose to keep my brother, who'll be 28 years old this month. And the doctors told Mom at the time, 5 years or so, you'll probably transition to a wheelchair. Next 7 or 8 years, you need to be getting your family ready, and you'll probably be gone. Well, I was 10 when she was diagnosed, and I'm 38 now, and she's still with us. And we almost lost her last January. She got pneumonia, was in the hospital, and when she left the hospital to go to rehab, she was in the hospital for probably 2 months or so, 2 or 3 months. They told her, so we didn't think you'd make it, and you're a miracle, And that's just been the theme of her life. But at the same time, when my mom responded in faith and turned and trusted the Lord, I hate to say it, my dad seemed to respond the other way. He seemed to despair. He seemed to perhaps kind of go through a midlife crisis. And it seems that from what I know, he did anything but run to the Lord in that. And it's funny now, I look back, I'm now older now than my dad was when my parents separated and were going through this. And so it's kind of funny to think about that. But my dad began to have a lot of out-of-town business trips. He began to have extramarital affair on my mother. My dad was the kind of guy that if you met him, you'd think he's the greatest thing ever. I've jokingly said, he could sell snow to the snowman. He just was a great salesman, a great guy. But I think inwardly he was in a tailspin. And I look back now, not with bitterness and anger, the Lord's helped me work through that, but more with pity and sorrow for him. I was talking to my friend Scott Rogers recently, and one of the things that kind of dawned on me is that it's sad that as a young man I began to set out to prove that I didn't want to be like my dad. And now I'm living with the hope that I live my life in such a way that I hope my children would see something in me that they would want to be like. And so over that time, I remember I got saved in March, and in June of that same year, June the 5th, I'll never forget, it was my sister's birthday. My dad hadn't been home from work in 2 days, and we didn't know where he was. And come to find out, my dad had been picked up by the authorities and was in jail, ended up going to prison for embezzling money from his company. And his life and the way of living had caught up with him, and things he had kept from my mom were uncovered. And he had this plan to pay it off and to make things right, but it caught him. And I remember my mom came into our room that night, and she had a black garbage bag, and she began to put my clothes in the garbage bag. About 10:30 one night, I'd already gone to bed, and I remember saying, Mom, what are you doing? And she sat on the side of my bed, and she was crying, and she said, we've got to go away, and we can't come back. And I need you to think about a few things you might want to take with you. A couple of your toys, we can't take a lot. We don't have room to take it with us. And I just remember, what? My grandparents came and got us, and that's how I ended up in Mississippi. We started over. And my parents were separated as my dad was in prison, and my mom waited on him to get out of jail and give him the opportunity to put our family back together. He didn't do it. And in fact, he said that he'd been praying that God would send somebody our way to take care of us. And I've had that conversation in my mind with anger and say, God did put somebody in our life to take care of us. It was supposed to be you. Why aren't you doing that? And that's when it began to, I went from, in my heart and mind, trying to defend my dad, and then it turned into anger as I realized now as an adult, he was rejecting us. He rejected his role, and that set me on a course of a lot of pain that we went through as a family. As I tell my story and I think through just, how Christ came into my life, as I think about some of the things that have happened in my life that molded and shaped me, I think about a life verse. A life verse is a verse that, maybe someone kind of encourages you, or you find along the way that it's just one you kind of find yourself coming back to. And I've shared mine is Romans 8:28. We know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, those who are called according to His purpose. And as a believer, I now have the hope of Christ, and I have Him to help me process difficult things that I've been through. One of the most difficult things that I've had to process, though, is coming to a place of peace and forgiveness with my dad. I remember hoping that my dad would put our family back together, and then having to accept the reality that he wasn't coming, and that my parents were getting a divorce, and that my mom did remarry another guy who I call Dad now. I remember it was almost like that my father was dead, but then high school graduation came, and it was on me, and I didn't want my daddy there. I wanted him. I sent him an invitation out of bitterness to show him, look, I made it without you. I learned how to drive without you. I learned how to tie a necktie without you. I learned how to ask a girl out on a date without you. And I felt like I had something to prove, and I was angry at my dad. I wanted him, and the reality is at the time it seemed like he didn't want me. The Lord was kind and patient with me through all of that. He came back into the picture off and on, and I remember not wanting to have anything to do with him. And the Lord put people and situations in my life that didn't let me dismiss it, didn't let me just erase it and forget it. But I remember my grandmother telling me, said, Jay, you got to forgive your daddy. And I remember thinking to myself, the Lord just, put in my heart, Jay, you come crying to me, want me to forgive you of your sins, and I do, and I'm faithful, and I do that. And who are you to withhold forgiveness from your dad? Well, the thing that really helped me was after I had 2 children. It was Father's Day, and I was pastor at Mount Manna Baptist Church. And it was funny. The secretary had brought me a bag of green beans, and I left them on the desk at the church. And it was Father's Day night, and I thought, oh, if she comes in and finds those green beans in the morning, it's going to hurt her feelings. So I said, I got to drive back out to the church and get those green beans and get them home. And so as I was driving, I realized, first of all, the green beans were in the back of the car the whole time. But I went on a ride out to the church to realize that. And I pulled over at the Walmart parking lot in Hernando. And I'd been hearing this radio program on AM 640 called Family Life Today. And over Mother's Day, the Lord been getting my heart ready. Every year, Mother's Day, Father's Day, they do a thing where all week they talk about honoring your mother and your father. And I had been told that no matter what my dad had done, I had to find honor for him. I had to learn to honor him. There weren't any conditions on that. That if I wanted the Lord's blessing in my life, ultimately, I was going to have to learn to honor my father and mother. Well, I remember when we found out we were having our first child, Caleb, and I saw the ultrasound for the first time, I said, oh God, I love that little red and blue heartbeat. You know, I remember falling in love at that moment. And I never will forget getting on the elevator and saying, oh God, I love him so much already, thank you. And I thought, Lord, I hope he'll love me one day. And the Lord, just kind and gentle, but he said, you want something that you're not willing to give. And I said, but Lord, we went on and had another child. And I was under conviction. I needed to honor my dad over on that Father's Day. And I pulled over Walmart parking lot, and I made excuses. Lord, I don't have his number. And the Lord said, well, you Googled and you found your Uncle Mike's number a while back. Call your Uncle Mike. He'll give you the number. So I called my Uncle Mike. He was like, Jay, call your daddy, call your daddy, call your daddy. Please call your daddy. So I called my dad, and we wept together on the phone. 2 days later, we met in South Haven. And I told him all about me and who I was and what God had blessed me with in my life. And that began a process of healing and a relationship. And the Lord showed me something. For years, I felt like that to have honor for my father, it meant I was going to take away something from my mother. And I remember having this feeling that with my youngest, when my second child came, I kind of had this panic. I love my first son so much. How could I love my second one as much? I didn't want to play favorites. I wanted to love both my kids. And what I learned was, it was a multiplied love. I didn't have to take anything away from my oldest to love my second. And the Lord showed me that the love I had for my wife and for him was a special, unique, a jealous love that I could have for no one else. But for my children, I would never run out of love as he's for me. And what I realized was, I didn't have to take any honor or respect away from my mother to love my father. And I was able to realize that I could give without taking away anything from my mom. That my mom and dad's relationship had ended, it was over, but that didn't mean mine had to. And so with the last 5 or 6 years of his life, there was peace and there was healing and there was good barbecue at times, and there were football games, and there were, what are you doing? He got to come and be a part of our third child's birth and share that experience. My dad died summer before last with cancer. He found out, and in 4 weeks he was gone. And I was able to be with him as he took his last breath, having known that God had restored. It was not the same, but I had realized it wasn't going to be the same. But that he had restored a place to give honor to my dad, that the Lord chose him to be my father and to give me life. And over the years, God has used the pain of some of my experiences, a lot of my experiences. My sister's killed in an accident. I could tell you all about that. But one of the things that I've realized is, as a believer, we're going to face trials. And then God's goodness and grace will bring us through those trials to teach us. But then it's so we can help in somebody else's life. If you're reading the Bible in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul says, I'm going to comfort you, and you're going to comfort others with the comfort I've given you. And so as the Lord builds these things to our life, it's not just for us, but it's so we can help other people. And that's what I hope to share my testimony here today would be, that it's not that I did anything good, but to just show how good God is and what he does. I am in full-time ministry now. For the first 14 years of ministry, I was on staff for 10 years at Mount Manna Baptist Church. I was a youth minister, associate pastor for about a year and a half. I became the pastor. The Lord led me to First Baptist Church in Dawson, where I was there, Dawson, Georgia. I was there about 4.5 years, and the Lord brought in my life something it's very special what I'm doing now. I'm now the new area director for District 3. in the Mississippi Delta for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I always had a heart for athletics, but I wasn't ever good enough to play. But that's okay. My favorite job in college, I was the equipment manager for the football team. I loved it. I just wanted to be part of the team. When I was a pastor at Mount Manna, I did upward flag football and cheerleading. We had kids everywhere. When I was in Georgia, I worked with FCA. And again, more time than you got. But I can tell you that God showed me, He said, I've got something extra special for you. And now I get invitations to preach at all these churches. I'm going into schools. And I talked to 83 kids 2 days ago in the school about living for Jesus and loving Him. And now the Lord has given me beyond what I know how to do. He's teaching me. I'm able to have influence in 58 high school, middle schools, and 5 colleges to tell them about the Lord, to raise up leaders. And I just want you to know that God is so good, and He is the waymaker. He is the one who takes all our sorrows and gives us not tears of bitterness and heartache, but tears of joy, as to see how He can take what the devil meant for harm, and He uses it for good. And so I just encourage you today, wherever you are, trust the Lord, trust Him, call on His name, and wait patiently, and He'll lift you up. And I want to say that my name is J. Thomason, and I have come to know that God's grace is enough.